You're standing on a ridge in eastern Turkey. The wind is thin here, almost 6,500 feet up. And below you, pressed into the mud, like a footprint left by something enormous, is a shape. A hull, pointed at one end, squared at the other, over 500 feet of it. Everyone told you it was a rock, a trick of erosion, a coincidence the human eye wanted to turn into a boat. But I ran the footage of this site back through modern pattern analysis tools, and the software flagged something inside that mud that no explorer standing on the surface ever saw. Something arranged in a rhythm that natural stone does not make. I'm going to show you what the machine found, and I'm going to give you the coordinates, the survey year, and the name of the geophysicist whose own scan started this whole thing. 39 degrees, 26 minutes north, 44 degrees, 14 minutes east. This is not a legend. It's a location you can pull up right now. I didn't want it to be real. That's the honest part. I spent the first month of this convinced I'd find the boring answer in an afternoon. I remember the exact moment that changed. I was overlaying two aerial passes of the formation, one shot in the late 1970s, one from a drone flight decades later, and when I aligned them, the internal lines didn't drift the way a landslide should. They held. Rock that's sliding downhill smears. This held its shape like a frame, and that's when I stopped treating this as a closed case. Let me take you back to how it was found, because the beginning already doesn't fit. In 1959, a Turkish army captain named İlhan Durupınar was reviewing aerial reconnaissance photographs, standard mapping work. He was looking at the Tenderek Mountains in the Doğu district, near the border with Iran, and in one frame he saw an object that stopped him cold, a boat shape, sitting alone on a slope, roughly 1,500 feet above the surrounding valley. It didn't match anything around it, so he flagged it. And the photo eventually made its way into a Life magazine feature in September of 1960 under a headline asking whether this could be the resting place of Noah's Ark. Now here's the first thing that snagged me. A local farmer had reportedly seen this shape years earlier in 1948, after a series of earthquakes and heavy rains stripped the mud away and revealed its edges. The ground itself uncovered it. Nobody carved it out. The earth peeled back and there it was, already formed, already waiting, and the size. When surveyors first measured the formation, they came back with a length of about 515 feet. Hold that number, because in the ancient account, the vessel is described as 300 cubits long. And if you use the Egyptian royal cubit, a real, documented unit of measurement, about 20.5 inches, 300 of them lands within a few feet of what the ground actually shows. I sat with that for a long time. A coincidence of shape I could accept, but a coincidence of shape and a coincidence of length, matching an ancient measurement almost exactly, that's two coincidences stacked on top of each other. And in my experience, when the coincidences start stacking, you're usually not looking at a coincidence anymore, but a shape and a number aren't proof. I knew that. So I went looking for what was underneath. And that's where the story stops being about what your eye can see and starts being about what the ground is hiding. In the mid-1980s, a man named Ron Wyatt brought a team to the site. Wyatt is a controversial figure. I'll be straight with you about that because it matters later, but he brought with him people who were not amateurs. One of them was a geophysicist named John Baumgardner, who held a doctorate and did real work in numerical modeling. Another was David Fasold, a former merchant marine officer who understood ship structure the way most of us understand our own hands. In 1985, they ran ground-penetrating radar across the formation. Radar that sends pulses into the earth and reads what bounces back, mapping density and structure below the surface without digging a single hole, and the readouts came back wrong. Not wrong like broken. Wrong like, this shouldn't be here. The scans showed regular, repeating reflections beneath the mud, evenly spaced lines running the length of the object. Fasold looked at the pattern and said it resembled the internal framing of a ship. The ribs, the bulkheads, the longitudinal supports. Natural rock formations don't do that. Rock folds, rock cracks, rock erodes in chaos. It does not lay itself out in evenly spaced parallel bars like the skeleton of a hull. That's the piece that pulled me all the way in, because a boat shape on the surface, fine, the mind plays tricks. But the mind doesn't fake a subsurface radar return. The radar doesn't care what you want to see. Now, I want you to feel the tension building the way I did, because here's the problem. Wyatt made a lot of claims. Some of them, frankly, were too big. He said he'd found metal fittings, rivets, even chambers. And when scientists heard those claims, the whole site got tossed in the trash. Guilt by association. If the loudest voice is overselling, the reasoning went, then the whole thing must be nonsense. But I don't get to throw out the radar just because I don't like the man who commissioned it. The data is the data, and the data had those evenly spaced lines. So therefore, I did what the original investigators couldn't do in 1985. I took the imaging, the aerial passes, the ground scans, everything I could pull together, and I fed it into modern analysis tools designed to find patterns the human eye misses. And that's when the site handed me its second secret. When you run a repeating structure through a pattern recognition pass, the software isn't looking at a boat. It doesn't know what a boat is. It's looking for periodicity for spacing that repeats at a consistent interval. Randomness has no interval. Erosion has no interval, but something built to a plan does. The internal reflections along that formation came back with a spacing that stayed consistent down the length of the object. Consistent intervals, again and again, like the frames of a hull set at regular distances. The software didn't see mud and rock, it saw rhythm. And here's what unsettled me most. The spacing lined up, roughly, with what you'd expect if you took that 300 cubit length and divided it into structural bays. The internal compartments a large wooden vessel would need to keep from flexing apart under its own weight. I sat back from my screen that night and I genuinely didn't sleep. Because I'd come into this expecting to debunk it. I expected the pattern tool to return noise. Instead, it returned order. But order isn't the same as a boat. I knew a geologist would have an answer ready, and I wanted to hear it. So let me bring the skeptic all the way into the room, because if you're sitting there thinking there's a simple explanation, this next part is built specifically for you. I need you to stay, because I went and found the best counter-argument that exists, and I put my own discovery up against it. The leading scientific explanation for the Durapinar formation comes from a geologist named Andrew Snelling, and his argument is genuinely good. He says the shape is what's called a syncline, a downward fold in layered rock. In that region, you have soft, muddy material flowing slowly downhill, and it wraps around a harder core of more resistant rock. Over time, the soft mud erodes away faster than the hard center, and what's left behind is a streamlined, boat-like shape, pointed at the upstream end, blunt at the downstream end. Water and gravity, doing exactly what water and gravity do. And I'll be honest with you, that explains the outline. It really does. The teardrop form, the pointed bow, the way it sits on a slope. If all I had was the shape, I would close the case right now and agree with him. The mind sees boats and clouds. I'm not immune to that. Snelling also went to the site himself and took samples, and he argued the material was ordinary rock, iron oxide concentrations, and geological banding, nothing manufactured. He said the so-called ribs were just the eroded edges of tilted rock layers. And that's a fair challenge. Tilted layers, seen from above, can look like evenly spaced bars. So I took his explanation seriously, and I pushed on my own data to try to break it, because that's the job. Here's where it breaks. A syncline's internal layers should follow the fold. They should curve with the geology, dip in the direction the rock dips, and they should extend beyond the boat shape into the surrounding hillside, because the rock layers don't stop at the edge of the formation, they run right through it. The boat outline would just be the visible slice of a much larger geological structure, but the internal reflections the radar picked up don't behave that way. They stop. They're contained within the whole outline. They start near one edge, run parallel, and end near the other edge as if bounded by something. Geological layers don't respect the edges of a boat shape. A boat's frames do. And there's a second problem the erosion model struggles with. The pointed end and the blunt end are on the wrong relationship to the slope in places. According to some of the survey work, the streamlining doesn't consistently match the direction the mud would have flowed. If gravity carved it, the shape should point the way the mud moved. Where it doesn't, the flowing mud story gets harder to hold. I'm not telling you the geologists are stupid. They're not. The syncline idea is the honest, careful, default answer, and for a plain rock on a hillside, it would be the right one. I'm telling you that the default answer was built to explain the outline, and it was never built to explain the evenly spaced internal structure. Because when Snelling made his case, the pattern analysis I ran didn't exist yet. He answered the question everyone was asking. He never got asked the question I'm asking now, and that gap, that's the whole case. That's the thread nobody pulled. Because here's what started to bother me the more I dug. The radar survey happened in 1985, nearly 40 years ago. This is a fixed location. You can drive to it. The Turkish government even built a visitor center overlooking it and put up signs. It is not hidden, it is not deep in a jungle, it is a marked, accessible site with a paved road. So why, in 40 years, did no major institution ever go back and run a proper, modern, deep subsurface survey to settle it once and for all? That's the question that changed the temperature of this whole investigation for me. Not what is it, but why did everyone who could answer it decide not to? And the answer, when I finally understood it, made me angry. And that gap, that untouched question, is exactly what I want you to be able to chase for yourself. Picture yourself tonight, sitting with that boat-shaped formation still burning in your head, wanting to check the radar rhythm against the geology yourself instead of taking anyone's word for it. That itch, the need to read the evidence with your own eyes, is exactly what the Lost Origins Complete Library was built for. It's 3 digital volumes you can read on any device, no special app needed. First Threshold shows you how AI-driven survey tools uncover ruins that stayed invisible for 10,000 years. Deep Signal hands you something even better, the grammar of evidence, a real method for reading contested findings without letting a loud voice fool you, the exact trap that buried this Turkish site for 40 years. And Hidden Systems pulls every framework into one casebook, including the Durapinar Archaeology of Sacred Claims we're walking through right now. Here's your free test for tonight. I gave you the coordinates, 39 degrees, 26 minutes north, 44 degrees, 14 minutes east. Pull them up on any free map app and see for yourself that this is a real, marked, drive-to-it location, not a legend. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description or the pinned comment. That site has sat unexamined for 40 years already, and that clock keeps running whether or not anyone reads the record it kept. So let me get back to that gap, because when I finally understood why nobody went back, it made me angry. The site got poisoned by its own discoverers, because a few people made sensational, unprovable claims. Wyatt's chambers, his rivets, his relics, the entire location became radioactive to serious academics. No credentialed geologist wanted their name near Noah's Ark, because the moment you say those 2 words in a grant application, your reputation is gone. It didn't matter that the radar data was real. It didn't matter that the measurements were real. The topic itself became untouchable. So the thing sat there for decades, on a hillside, with evenly spaced structures buried inside it that nobody with the right equipment was willing to go re-examine, because the career risk of being wrong, or worse, being right about something this loaded, was too high. The evidence wasn't destroyed. It was orphaned, left in the open where anyone could see it and no one would touch it. But somebody finally did. And this is where the story turns, because the machine reading wasn't the end of it. The ground itself had one more thing to say. In the last few years, a joint research effort brought Turkish and American academics back to the formation teams associated with Istanbul Technical University, Andrew University in Turkey, and a regional university in the Ara province. Not treasure hunters, geologists and analysts. And this time, they didn't just eyeball the shape, they took physical samples, rock and soil, pulled directly from the formation, and they ran laboratory analysis on the material itself. The results, reported around 2022 and 2023, were not what a plain hillside should give you. The samples contained clay-like materials, marine deposits, and what the researchers described as remnants of sea material, the kind of residue you'd expect from something that had been submerged from a place where water once stood. And when they dated the material, the ages came back in a window between roughly 3,000 and 5,000 years old, with some of the samples clustering toward the older end of that range. Sit with that for a second. Marine material, on a mountain slope, 6,500 feet above sea level, in a region that is, today, bone dry and hundreds of miles from any ocean. Now, a careful scientist will tell you, and they'd be right, that eastern Anatolia was covered by ancient seas in the deep geological past, so marine sediment in the rock isn't automatically a smoking gun. That's true. I'm not going to overstate it the way Wyatt overstated his rivets. That's exactly the trap that ruined this site the first time. But here's what the age dates do. Deep geological marine sediment is millions of years old. The material that came back from those samples wasn't millions of years old. It was thousands. 3,000 to 5,000 years. That's not the age of an ancient seabed. That's the age of human civilization. That's the Bronze Age. That's the exact window the flood traditions point to, and that changed the shape of the whole question for me. Because now I wasn't just looking at a boat-shaped rock with rhythmic structures buried inside it. I was looking at a boat-shaped formation, matching an ancient length to within a few feet, containing evenly spaced internal structures the erosion model can't explain, and carrying material inside it that dates to the same few thousand-year window as the story it's accused of imitating. Any one of those, alone, I could wave away. I wanted to wave them away. But they kept landing on top of each other. And every time I tried to knock one down, the ground handed me another. Let me walk you through why the age date is the piece that broke the case open for me, because it's subtle and I almost missed it. If this formation is a pure syncline old rock, folded and eroded, then every bit of material in it should read as ancient. Millions of years. Uniform. There's no mechanism for a natural rock fold to contain concentrated deposits that are only a few thousand years old, sitting in the specific structural bays where the radar found its rhythm. Fresh, young material doesn't just appear inside old bedrock. But if something was built out of organic material, timber, reeds, pitch, and it came to rest here, and it decayed, and it got buried under mud and mineralized over the centuries, then you would expect exactly this. Younger material. Concentrated inside the outline, chemically distinct from the surrounding hillside. The wood rots, the shape stays, the minerals replace the organics, and the ground preserves the ghost of the structure that used to be there. That process has a name in geology. It's how petrified wood forms. It's how entire forests turn to stone while keeping the grain of the original timber. The material changes, the architecture remains. And that reframed the radar for me completely. Those evenly spaced reflections might not be metal, they might not be intact wood, they might be the mineral shadow of where wood used to be the density difference between the packed material that filled the old structural bays and the walls that once divided them. A skeleton, fossilized in place, its ribs preserved not as objects, but as differences in density that only radar and pattern analysis can read. The explorers standing on the surface for 60 years couldn't see it. Their eyes were the wrong instrument. You cannot see density with your eyes. You need the machine. And until the machine reread the old scans, the most important feature of this entire site was completely invisible, hiding in plain sight, under the boots of every person who ever climbed up to look. That's the thing I flagged in the title. That's what every explorer missed. Not because they weren't looking, because they were looking with the wrong tool, at a signal that only shows up when you stop trusting the eye and start trusting the return. Now, let me be the skeptic one more time, because you deserve the full weight of the doubt before I ask you to sit with the conclusion. Could the young age dates be contamination? Modern material washing into the samples? Possibly. That's a real concern, and it's why this needs a proper, published, peer-reviewed excavation and not a press release. I won't pretend the 2023 sampling is the final word. It isn't. It's preliminary. The researchers themselves called for more study. Could the radar rhythm be tilted rock layers after all, just neatly spaced by chance? Possibly. Nature does occasionally produce regular spacing. But here is where I finally landed, after months of trying to talk myself out of it. Every single skeptical explanation requires you to explain away one piece. The shape that's erosion, the length matching the cubit that's coincidence, the radar rhythm that's tilted layers, the young marine material that's contamination. Each explanation is plausible on its own, but you need all four of them to be true at once. You need erosion and coincidence and tilted layers and contamination to all stack up at the exact same spot to produce something that matches an ancient description on shape, on size, on internal structure, and on age. At some point, believing in 4 separate lucky accidents stacked in one location becomes harder than believing the simplest thing, that something came to rest on that mountain, and the mountain kept a record of it. That's not faith. I want to be clear about that. I'm not telling you the flood account is literally true, or that this proves a religious text. I'm a researcher, not a preacher. What I'm telling you is narrower and, honestly, stranger. There is a boat-shaped formation at a known coordinate of a specific length containing evenly spaced internal structures and young mineralized material that the official geological explanation was never actually designed to account for, and that the institutions capable of settling it have spent 40 years refusing to touch because the subject is too embarrassing to fund. The evidence existed. The 1985 radar preserved it. David Fasold and John Baumgartner recorded those internal reflections before most of us were born, and then the world laughed the whole site off the table because a louder man oversold it. The data survived anyway, sitting in old survey records waiting. And when I finally overlaid it with modern pattern tools and the new sample dates, the thing that had been dismissed for 2 generations stood back up. That's the part that gets me. Nobody buried this in a vault. There was no conspiracy with a lock and key. The suppression was quieter, and in a way worse, it was the collective decision of serious people to look away, because looking would cost them. The truth wasn't hidden, it was abandoned, and abandonment is how you lose something in plain sight for 40 years. I keep coming back to that farmer in 1948. The earthquakes hit, the rain came, the mud slid off, and the shape emerged from the ground on its own, as if the earth was trying to show someone. It got its photograph in a magazine. It got a captain's name attached to it. And then the modern world, with all its instruments, decided it wasn't worth the risk of a serious look. The ground offered it up. We're the ones who turned away. So, here's where I've landed, and I'm handing it to you exactly as I found it. There is a 515-foot shape on a Turkish mountainside, at 39 degrees, 26 minutes north, 44 degrees, 14 minutes east, that matches an ancient measurement, hides a rhythm the eye can't see, and carries material dated to the same few thousand years as the oldest story we have, and the tool that finally read it wasn't a shovel or a drill, it was a pattern the machine caught that every human missed. Maybe it's 4 coincidences in a row. Maybe the mountain is just very good at pretending. But I've spent my life pulling threads on cases everyone else called closed, and I have never seen 4 accidents line up this cleanly and mean nothing. If you're still here, it's because you're the kind of person who can't accept it's just a rock when the rock keeps failing to act like one. You want the return the machine saw, not the story that's convenient. That's the whole reason you clicked, and that's the reason you made it to the end. So I want to hear from you. The internal spacing, the evenly placed structures the radar found running the length of the hull is the one detail I can't stop thinking about. Do you believe that spacing is tilted rock layers by chance, or the fossil shadow of something built? Tell me in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because this audience stretches farther than you'd think, and I read the ones that push back the hardest. If this is your kind of question, the case everyone else filed under solved, that quietly refuses to stay solved, then you belong with the people who keep reopening these files with me. There's a next one already pulling at me. Off the coast, in water most divers can't reach, there's a stone structure with right angles that the tides could not have cut, and the survey that first mapped it recorded a depth that shouldn't be possible for something man-made. I've already started overlaying the scans, and it's not adding up either. The mountain kept its record for 4,000 years. The least we can do is finally read it. Here's where it gets real inside the Unexplained Society. I pick up exactly where I stopped tonight and walk you through the full subsurface scan, line by line, and you can ask me anything. Send your question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You're never doing this alone here. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen, and you can cancel anytime. One click, no risk. Now, if that discovery stirred something in you, wait until you hear what the ancient words reveal next. There were beings outside that ark, and they weren't human. That story is starting right here.